back to the Washington Outsider Report on the Coalition Radio. For those newly joining the program, my name is Irina Zuckerman and I am the editor-in-chief of the Washington Outsider. With us today, we have a special guest, Angelica Oung. She's an energy advocate at Clean Energy Transition Alliance in Taipei. Angelica, thank you so much for joining us today. We'll be discussing controversial issue that nevertheless got somewhat overshadowed in the media by all the geopolitical developments, which is Taiwan's shutdown of its nuclear facilities and all the impact that it will have on its own energy objectives, as well as in the geopolitical context of what is going on today. Before we begin with that, just wanted to ask you to tell us a little bit about yourself, your professional experiences in this area, and how you came to be interested in nuclear energy and clean energy.
Thanks, Irina. First of all, I'd like to thank you and your listeners for paying attention to this very important topic. My name is Angelica Oung. I'm Taiwanese American, and I've been working in Taiwan as a business reporter before I got interested in energy. So I first got interested in offshore wind, which Taiwan was building and has been building to try and replace nuclear energy. But as I looked into the topic more and more as a reporter, the more I realized that simply doesn't work that way. You cannot replace a stable and consistent source of energy with something that literally comes and goes with the wind. So I did a lot of soul searching, and I actually changed what it is that I do. So I went from being a reporter concentrating on the offshore wind industry to being an advocate for the pro-nuclear industry. And here I would like to thank my employer. Yes, I have an organization in Taipei called the Clean Energy Transition Alliance, which allows me to comment on all energy-related issues, not just nuclear. But my employer is the Anthropocene Institute, and we're a philanthropic organization based out of the Bay Area, and it is our mission to give everybody in the world a decent quality of life. That means probably a lot of the use of nuclear energy, although we also investigate into things like how to make our oceans healthier and that sort of thing.
Great. And, I find all of this particularly fascinating as international and global trends tend to favor nuclear energy at this time after a long period of distancing from this type of energy. And in Taiwan, it seems to be going in the opposite direction after really failed experiments in Germany and other countries. So let's get to that. Because I'm going to try to figure out what is going on. So let's actually start with the historical context for this situation to let our audience understand a little bit more how this all came about. Could you tell us what were the primary factors behind Taiwan's failure to complete and operationalize the Longmen, which is the fourth nuclear power plant, despite decades of investment? You would think that a major expenditure like that would want to be completed and not waste taxpayers' money, but apparently something went terribly awry.
Well, something we always have to remember, Irina, is that history is path dependent, and whether or not it makes sense or not, where we are depends on where we came from. So instead of trying to look at the decision behind not continuing with Longmen in isolation, I think it's really important to go back to the very beginning of nuclear energy in Taiwan. So, as you know, Taiwan didn't always used to be the plucky little democracy making the best microchips in the world. We're going to rewind to the 70s and 80s. And back then, Taiwan was a third world country. You can say aspiring second world country. Instead of making cutting edge technology, we were making Barbie dolls and sneaker shoes. In fact, in the 1980s, Taiwan was the Barbie doll capital of the world. 80% of it was made on the island. So from that place, the ruling KMT at the time, you have to remember back then, Taiwan was an authoritarian regime. So Chiang Kai-shek was the first, I guess you can call him dictator or authoritarian of the island. He then passed his rule onto his son, Jiang Jingguo, and during that time, they were very focused on how do we develop Taiwan's infrastructure. And they decided that given the fact that there's no fossil fuel resources on the island, nuclear energy was a must. I would consider Taiwan's nuclear energy program no less than an economic miracle for the island, because we built it while we're still quite low in terms of technology and wealth. But by the middle of the 1980s, Taiwan had 8 functioning nuclear power reactors and, 6 functioning nuclear reactors. And they were providing more than 50% of the island's electricity needs. So you're talking about so much, actually, Taiwan, so much low carbon energy, and it was relatively inexpensive to operate. And this laid the economic foundation for Taiwan's economic miracle takeoff in the 80s and 90s. So, what's the problem? The problem is, of course, not everybody was happy being under an authoritarian regime. And by the 80s, you already have a very significant movement called Dangwai, literally outside of the party. And they wanted democracy. And it just so happens, the real joke of history, that the Dangwai movement coalesced into the Democratic Progressive Party in 1986. That is the year, of course, of Chernobyl. So as a result, when they got together and they wrote their party constitution, it was very natural to also put in there that Taiwan should be a nuclear-free homeland. Back in those days, the global sentiments after Chernobyl was justifiably full of fear about atomic energy and misunderstanding. And so over time, those nuclear power plants that, in fact, we've never had an accident, we've never had any kind of malfunction. They've worked very well to support our economic growth, but they also became symbols of authoritarian rule, of the placing of economic development over values such as democracy and the environment. And they became inextricably entwined with the Democratic Progressive Party's reason to be, which is to create a democratic, independent Taiwan.
So essentially, the democracy in Taiwan is intertwined with anti-nuclear program, and they essentially decided that it's too dangerous to continue on that path. And I would wonder, given this history, how did the 2011 Fukushima disaster in Japan influence public opinion and government decision-making on nuclear energy? Was it also a contributing factor?
Absolutely. So you have to understand there's definitely different currents in Taiwanese thought. And so there's the very pragmatic, pro-economic development side that always was like, well, being anti-nuclear energy is the dream, but can we do that dream given the fact that we use a lot of energy and we do live on an island, and every single molecule of hydrocarbon needs to come into Taiwan by being imported from somewhere else. So even within the DPP, or I would call at the pan-green camp, because they have some smaller parties that are not DPP but are allied with them. So the pan-green camp was like, it is a value to us to get rid of these highly visible, highly in our mind, contaminating reminders of authoritarian times. But can we do it? And then do we have to do it? And the middle voters are not like, they can't exactly decide, but the 2011 Fukushima disaster was really terrible because Taiwan, through its historical legacy, maybe, we used to be a colony of Japan. We actually think of the Japanese as being extremely, extremely competent and extremely, extremely capable. So the fact that the Japanese could suffer a nuclear accident was terrifying, even for the people who are leaning towards, well, maybe we can support nuclear energy because we need it on economic grounds, the middle voters, not the extremist DPP who are always like 100% anti-nuclear on principle. But the middle voters were really shaken hard by the Fukushima accident. Now, I happen to know that TEPCO was warned repeatedly about the potential risk of Fukushima, that the seawalls weren't high enough, that the diesel backup generators should not have been in the basement. And people kind of forget that there's a flip side to Japanese conscientiousness, which is also Japanese inflexibility and inability to think of the big picture, even while they're sticklers for following the rules to the letter. So, in fact, I feel really bad for the Taiwanese nuclear industry because I think we've always been very responsible, very technically capable, and something like Fukushima would not have happened in Taiwan for 100 reasons. But in the mind of the people who do not have the ability to actually know what the technical sticking points are, all they can see is, well, if it can happen in Japan, it is certainly way too dangerous a technology for us to use here in Taiwan.
Wow, that's quite tragic in many ways. But you know, but this history of suspicion is probably not the only contributing factor to the fact that the nuclear plant ended up being eventually suspended. And I wanted to ask you, what about things like mismanagement, cost overruns, technological issues? How did they color this situation?
Sure. I would like to be very proud of the fact that the first nuclear power plants, the first 3 nuclear power plants, which resulted in 6 reactors, they all were built with very little drama. And considering the level of GDP Taiwan had at the time, they were true achievements. And they ran to their 40-year license lifetimes. By the way, all 6 of those reactors are technically, there's no barrier for them to get life extended to 60 years, 80 years, as they are routinely done in America. We really ran into problem with cost overruns and construction issues with the 4th nuclear power plant. And there's twofold reasons for that. One reason is I have to be very transparent. I think Taipower messed up by trying to take on too big of a role. You have to remember back then when we were starting to build the 4th nuclear power plant, Taipower felt really confident in their ability to do more on their own because they did a lot of the construction. They were kind of like their own engineering and procurement for a lot of those. So they weren't just doing the low-level work. They were doing fairly high-level work. But they tried to take on too much of the project management. We weren't mature enough to do that. That caused part of the problems, but on its own, frankly, it wouldn't have been a big deal, and all those problems were eventually resolved. What could not have been overcome, unfortunately, was the political objections. So they caused a lot of stop-start construction. And I'm going to fast forward over a lot of drama, but eventually, what really, in my opinion, killed the fourth nuclear power plant dead was President Ma Ying-jeou's decision to mothball the plant when it was already extremely advanced. Reactor 1 was at such a high level of completion that they were ready to insert the fuel. It was ready to start splitting atoms, basically. So it was the eve of a success after a long and winding journey, but at the same time, you had a basically somebody in Taiwan seen as a saint and a martyr to democracy. Basically, his name is Lin Yixiong. During the White Terror era, under the authoritarian regime, his whole family was murdered in a notorious incident that's widely believed to have been state orchestrated, although nothing was ever proved definitively. So he's kind of a pro-democracy figure that has a lot of moral authority in Taiwan. And he started doing a hunger strike against the nuclear power plant. This created a fireball of controversy, and President Ma, a decent man in many ways, but I think he lacked strength as a leader. He blinked, he backed down. He thought, oh no, we have this election coming up, and this guy's hunger strike is causing a lot of controversy. Of course, he recognized the importance of nuclear power. He's completely cognizant, but he decided, as a political dodge, what he will do is to announce the mothballing of the nuclear power plant to take the heat of the issue, get through the election, and then he'll have more room to maneuver. But that's not how history turned out. The KMT got slaughtered in that particular election, and they fell out of power. And that effectively doomed nuclear power in Taiwan. Because I think that the narrative shifted to, oh, even President Ma of the KMT, if he wouldn't even support his own plant, then what are they really hiding? How can we trust them when they say that nuclear power is in fact safe to use? Also, you had other headwinds, like we know that politics on the national level is not always the politics that works on the local level. So you have the mayor of New Taipei City, who is KMT. His name is Hou You-yi. He started doing, I would say, pretty shady anti-nuclear things, like, for instance, not giving the license for a storage facility, interim storage facility for high-level nuclear waste in New Taipei City. And that resulted in the premature closure of, I believe, the second nuclear power plant, simply because when you use nuclear energy, you withdraw the fuel rods and you put it in something called wet storage for a period of time. Usually, this is just a few months to maybe a couple of years max. This allows the water, which is actively cooled, actively circulated, to lose a certain amount of heat before it is safe to put into what we call dry storage. And a dry storage is basically a big, extremely secure barrel made out of steel and concrete. And once the nuclear waste, the high-level waste, is in one of those dry storage barrels, it's actually, you can go right up to them. There are pictures of nuclear activists going up to the dry storage barrel, hugging it and posing with it, and it's totally safe. So the 1-2 punch between President Ma failing to support Longmen on a national level at a critical point where he had the power back then just to let her run, and the mayor being really wishy-washy and flip-floppy about whether or not nuclear is safe by not allowing a license for interim storage. that created a real atmosphere of doubt. And into that atmosphere of doubt, the DPP decided we are really going to double down on the No Nuclear Homeland platform. So in 2016, when President Tsai Ing-wen, the most visible president in recent years, she got elected on the No Nuclear Homeland platform. And ever since then, I think it's been a real struggle, despite the mounting science, despite the improvement in nuclear prestige worldwide, despite the change of mind, dramatic change of mind we've seen in Europe and the US and all over the place. It's just really, really hard for the DPP to turn around on this issue because they bet so much political capital on it all the way back in 2016.
So it's crazy because now they have a graceful way to move away from that position by saying there's new science and just basically saying, it's nobody's fault. It was the right decision then, but right now, but I guess a lot of the optics just make it difficult for politicians to kind of back away. So I'm
Well,
curious, these corruption scandals, this lack of public transparency, was it something also that the GPP and others have been using as their card? I wonder if it's just about energy per se, but also about the politics of opposing the other parties because of these past scandals.
you're bringing up a lot there. Let me tell you something that sometimes surprise people who only pay attention to Taiwan from far away, which is that corruption is pretty rife and endemic in Taiwan.
Mm-hmm.
And so when people point out corruption scandals, it is often not because of a thing being particularly corrupt, but because they're against that thing and they want to find a reason.
Mm-hmm.
So it's true that the DPP have pointed out past examples of corruption related to the nuclear power plants. But in my mind, actually, those plants were built pretty inexpensively. And while I can't say that there's zero corruption, of course, there's corruption. It's Taiwan. You're going to expect it. To me, it's not a legitimate way to attack the
Mm-hmm.
nuclear power plants. Also, since 2016, every single year, it's become more and more blatantly obvious how nuclear power is something that Taiwan can't really do without, not without doing serious, serious damage to our economy. This is let alone our decarbonization goals. The problem is it's a lot easier to promise things than it is to deliver. So President Tsai Ing-wen, when she took power in 2016, she had a fantastic plan for getting rid of nuclear energy. I forgot exactly what percent it was in the Taiwanese mix, maybe 15%. I don't know exactly, but less than 20 for sure. And she's like, we're just going to replace nuclear energy with renewable energy, and then everything will be fine. That is why Taiwan, during her years in office, did a huge and really expensive push for renewable energy. Solar, yes, but not just solar. We knew solar wasn't going to be enough because Taiwan has 23 million people. It's about the same population as the whole country of Australia, but the physical size of Taiwan is half that of Tasmania, that little island on the bottom of Australia. And in addition to that, 70% of Taiwan is mountainous and therefore unsuitable for solar farms. And the northern third is too cloudy. So everybody knew solar wasn't going to be the whole solution. Onshore wind was going to be a very, very minor solution. But President Tsai noticed that there's ocean around us. And so she decided we're to go in big for offshore wind. So she says there's plenty of offshore wind. We'll just do offshore wind to replace nuclear. And our new energy mix is going to be in 2025, 50% gas, 30% coal, and 20% renewable energy, 0% nuclear. Now that we are in 2025, we can check in on her scorecard, and it does not look good. First of all, she's failed when it comes to increasing gas to 50%. We're at 40%, 40 something percent. There's a hard deck to how much gas we should have in Taiwan. But right now it's not limited by how much we should have, but by the receiving terminals, which are necessary to turn the liquefied natural gas back into gas we can use again. So that's one headache. She failed to get to the gas that she wanted to get to. Coal, she has not managed to reduce it to 30%. It is also at 40 something percent. The percentage of coal is very, very similar to when she took office. Now, finally, we come to renewable energy. She said it's going to be 20%. According to last year's numbers, the most recent ones we have available, all of renewable energy in Taiwan, after a huge push, is about 10%. So not even enough to replace the nuclear energy that she got rid of. That's the one thing that she can say she really did. In 2025, just a few weeks ago, so outside of her term, but we closed our last nuclear power plant, and that one last reactor consisted of 3% of Taiwan's grid before it was shut off. And a really sad statistic I like to remind people is if you counted up all the wind turbines in Taiwan, onshore, offshore, all that we've ever built, that's still a little less than 3% that one reactor was putting out. And it's the 3% cannot replace that 3% we lost because all of wind energy is exceedingly intermittent. And the wind blows most often in the winter. And Taiwan, because of our climate and need for air conditioning, is a summer peaking grid. So I would say that looking back at President Tsai's energy policy, fairly objectively, it's been like a treadmill where you lose good, reliable, low carbon nuclear energy, and you fail to replace it with enough renewable energy. That causes a lot of problems on its own because Taiwan is also an island grid. It's harder for us to manage that intermittency compared to a bigger grid, like, for instance, Europe, where you can always spread things around.
So what were the reasons for her failure to meet those objectives? I mean, what was stopping her?
Yeah, for first of all, let's get back to corruption, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's always corruption in Taiwan. A lot of it is gang. Well, gang make it sound like the Jets versus the Sharks. No, a lot of it's related to entrenched interests that are very local.
Organized crime, basically.
Yes, exactly, and it's very pervasive. And renewable energy is actually exceedingly vulnerable to interference by organized crime, to the point where we actually have a term for it. We call them the green cockroaches. And the entrenched interest that, yeah. So, for instance, anything to do with land procurement is an absolute horror show because local entrenched interests will always have a way to make you pay more than you should for the land. And that's the story of solar and why it's so expensive in Taiwan. It People always tell me, Angelica, solar is just getting cheaper and cheaper. Solar is the future. You just need to build enough solar and batteries, and that just plug TSMC into that. That's not a problem. Yes, it is a problem. It is a huge problem. because getting land is the number one obstacle to solar in Taiwan. And the most attractive, most high producing, most kind of sizable trenches are already gone. They're already built upon.
Mhm.
And now you're going after the smaller, more marginal, more contested, more difficult parcels of land. And you're going after things like rooftops. We're not a country like Australia. In Australia, there's so few people and so many rooftops. If everybody puts a rooftop solar on their roof, hey, maybe you can't get enough solar. Australia also have problems with getting to their renewable grid, but those are problems that maybe with the right technical storage solutions, maybe they can overcome it. I don't know. All I know is it cannot be done in Taiwan because there's not enough space to put in the most high producing, the cheapest kind of solar. So you have a real patchwork there. And so that's solar. Oh, but what about offshore wind? Isn't offshore wind supposed to be the bulk renewable solution? Well, not really, because even though Taiwan is surrounded by the ocean and the Taiwan Strait produces very well, there are many areas where you cannot build an offshore wind farm. Maybe it's too deep. People say floating offshore wind is possible. I say it's technically possible and financially impossible because you're now getting to wind turbines that are basically as tall as the Eiffel Tower. And to put that kind of kit on top of a foundation that is just floating around is not just a huge engineering challenge, it is guaranteed to be extremely, extremely expensive. And then up and down the supply chain, unfortunately, there's been a lot of bad policy making, possibly corruption, but even in the absence of corruption, a bad policy called local content requirements that require a lot of these complicated and out XXL pieces of equipment to be made in Taiwan. And that has made offshore wind in Taiwan some of the most expensive offshore wind farms in the world. But let me tell you, Irina, even if we didn't have those problems, even if we had a perfectly administered offshore wind program that can build very, very competitively priced offshore wind, the most that offshore wind can do for Taiwan is be a fuel saver in the winter, because that is when the wind is really blowing in Taiwan in the winter, and even then intermittently. So you always have to have complete coverage from a fossil plant to crank up to replace it if the wind is not blowing. So with offshore wind plants, we can maybe use a little less LNG in the winter. It is not an energy secure solution anywhere you cut it. By the way, offshore wind was more President Tsai's baby. She invested a lot of political capital into that, and she made sure while she was in power that they got everything they needed to keep going. But since President Lai took over, Taiwan projects have become stalled, and I believe a lot of it might end up canceled. First of all, because it's unpopular, it costs a lot of money. It doesn't always produce energy when you need it. And it's become not unpopular with the people for those reasons. So President Lai does not treat it like his political burden. That is something he puts on President Tsai. And to tell you the truth, fair enough, I'd probably do the same thing if I were in his position.
So it sounds to me like it's a mixture of things. On the one hand, yes, you have this long-stand political opposition to nuclear, but it also sounds like an over-investment in a self-interest, which in itself smacks of, corruption. If you have to produce these projects with assistance or quiet agreement from entrenched interests, quote unquote, clearly you have to deal with those entrenched interests, and somebody is backing those projects, given that I'm sure feasibility studies show the level of expense it would
Mhm.
take. So what I'm saying is, isn't it in itself an example of corruption?
Well, let me tell you, I've just recently been in touch with a Canadian researcher who was invited to come to Taiwan pretty early on in the Tsai administration. I think maybe it was 2017 or something, to do a report on the feasibility of transitioning to renewable energy from nuclear and further decarbonize from there. And so the expert came to Taiwan and she wrote a very full report saying, you guys don't have what it takes to do this. And basically, they ignored the experts. They had come to to Taiwan and do an assessment. So I believe they went into this with their eyes open. They knew that they were attempting something that is both politically expedient and allows them to create a whole new group of stakeholders that would be beholden to the vision. I want to steer clear here uh, of pointing fingers at mafia ties or anything like that because I can't
Hmm.
prove any of it. Maybe
Sure.
it's there, maybe it's not. But what we can say very clearly, just from the publicly available information, is that on the backs of the Thai administration's local content policy, you created a whole new group of Taiwanese businesses, enterprises that made massive multi-billion US dollar investments to become a part of the offshore wind supply chain. And they did that because they were promised the local content policy will continue to guarantee them a domestic market. This allowed President Tsai to sell the offshore wind industry not as a burden, but as an investment. She was able to very convincingly, because she's a very well spoken, very authoritative woman, she was very convincingly telling the Taiwanese public, we're not just spending a lot on offshore wind farms for the electricity. We are producing a whole supply chain that will eventually become a new golden goose for Taiwan because this is a growing technology. Denmark's using it, Germany's using it, Japan will use it, South Korea will use it. Everybody's going to use it, and the Taiwanese supply chain will be right there. And we're going to make money exporting turbine components and wind turbine foundations. And all of this was just so unrealistic that I can't imagine a smart woman such as herself saying it with a straight face because the made in Taiwan components ended up being often twice or even
Hmm.
higher the price of components. And I'm not even comparing to made in China, they're even cheaper. I'm
Hmm.
talking about the made in Indonesia, made in Vietnam. Um, Taiwanese components were not competitive with those. To the point where I had offshore wind developers frequently complaining to me that their projects are going to be dead unless those local content requirements were loosened. So she created she had an unworkable energy policy that she tried to fix by creating an unworkable offshore wind industry. So it's trying to fix another failure,
Hmm.
a failure with another failure, and it's failure all the way down. She failed to miss her targets. And yet, back in 2020, when it was already fairly clear by 2020, she wasn't going to, or maybe it's 2021, but by then it was fairly clear she was not going to make her 20% renewable energy by 2025 goal. She actually had the chutzpah to say that Taiwan is going to be net zero by 2050, and we're going to do it with renewable energy and no nuclear required. And that was That was when I became really disappointed with her. When I first came to Taiwan, I was a huge fan of President Tsai. I thought she was smart, she was cool, she spoke very well, and she made Taiwan look good. So I was a huge fan of hers. I wanted to be a believer of hers. And it's been a real process of disillusionment ever since. And very conveniently, since her term only lasts for 8 years, she left a ripe old pickle for her successor, President Lai. But she's home free. She's done with her work. She does a little bit of, light para diplomatic things, going to Europe, speaking to lawmakers, that sort of thing. But nobody really is connecting her with Taiwan's energy situation anymore, and they should put it squarely at her door because I think President Lai, even though he should be doing better, is has been handed an impossible situation.
This is crazy, especially in light of the fact that by the time you're telling me this whole situation with offshore wind developed, it became obvious that Germany is struggling with its offshore wind industry. That was known for years now. This is not a new information.
I would say even it's so much more ironic than that. I would say that Taiwan saved the bacon of a lot of offshore wind developers and companies in Europe
Mm,
because by the time President Tsai got started, this was a mid like 2016-ish period, that those few years, Europe was starting to withdraw what they call the feed-in tariff for offshore wind farms. They're saying off feed-in tariffs, it's a technical term. It's easier to think of it as a guaranteed price for 20 years. So they're basically saying you are a baby industry. We want to support you by
mm,
guaranteeing you a premium price for 20 years for every kilowatt hour that you produce. That was called a feed-in tariff. And by 2014, 2015, Europe was like, no, 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 we cannot do this because the wind turbines are not always producing valuable electricity when we need it. And we're going to go broke paying top dollar whenever they produce. We have to go to a system through the electricity market where the
mhm.
wind power is priced for how much we needed at the time. So, okay, they will do contract for difference, whatever, to still give wind an edge, but it's not enough. The feed-in tariff gravy train was coming to a stop, and they were like, well, what should we do? Where should we go? That was when President Tsai was like, hey, come to Taiwan, build wind farms here. We'll give you the feed-in tariffs. That was what she did. So they all came to Taiwan, not because out of the goodness of their hearts, but because they saw it as a growth opportunity they badly needed at a time when industry was in crisis. Um, so we ended up signing these feed-in tariff contracts, and then the DPP also realized, right? We can't keep doing feed-in tariffs forever. They're just like, oh, we'll just give the cost to TSMC because, as you know, the tech companies have their own supply chain, and a lot of it is from OEM manufacturers in Taiwan making stuff for their final clients, Apple, Google,
Mhm.
Microsoft, um, those clients. So all of those tech titans of the US made an ambitious pledge to go carbon free, and that gave their downstream suppliers a lot of anxiety because it's easy for Apple to say, we'll go carbon free by 100% renewable by 2050 or whenever it is. For them, it's just a few offices in Cupertino. It's their supply chain that actually makes their stuff that's going to contend with the problem of how do you make things on renewable energy, and so that created a market, a theoretical market for above cost offshore wind energy, not as a source of the energy to actually make these things, but as a sticker. They call it a REC, renewable energy certificate, as a source of RECs for the tech companies to claim that their energy is 100% green. So that was the trick that the DPP hoped to pull. It's like, yes, we start off supporting them with the feed-in tariffs, but then it's the tech companies that's going to take over, and they're going to be the suckers. No, I mean the green energy buyers, and they have to do that because they have to be accountable to Apple, Google, Microsoft, etc. The thing that they didn't take into account is those Taiwanese tech companies are not stupid. They feel the supply chain pressure, of course,
Hmm.
but they also see that, and very validated now in 2025, they
Sure.
also suspect that the parent companies making those clean energy pledges might not be 100% serious. Um,
Hmm.
so they really hedged. They did buy some offshore wind 20-year contracts for a fixed price, but
Hmm.
they really hedged. They were like, if it's too expensive, we're not going to buy it. We're not going to be endless suckers for these 20-year fixed price contracts when we don't know how serious our customers are going to be about their renewable pledges. And those commitments have been rapidly eroding. And the reason is actually AI. It's one thing back then for Google to say, oh, we'll just run on 100% renewable energy.
Hmm.
That was when they saw their power use as being fairly constant, fairly stagnant. They'll keep improving on the tech, but they thought their energy use was their energy use, right? They'll just improve the tech without necessarily using more power. But when it became obvious that um, the battle isn't over who's going to come up with the latest killer app, but who's going to develop the smartest AI, who's going to get there first, even to AGI, the game changed completely. Because in order to train a smarter AI, you need the biggest data center with the most amount of compute. And the amount of compute you can have is not just up to how many chips you have, but whether or not you have the massive amount of electricity to run those data centers. So once the fight to tech supremacy became a fight for who can build the biggest data centers, all of a sudden they won't say it openly, but you notice they don't talk so much about their carbon free by such and such a date goals anymore because they're not on track at all to meet those goals anymore. And they're not on track to meet those because they've been like sucking up the juice like crazy, building
Hmm.
data centers like crazy. And if there's happens to be low carbon energy around, yeah, they'll pay more for it. But at the end of the day, they don't care. They just need the juice. So green goals, um, uh, they won't like me putting it this way, but if not out of the window, then at least deprioritize. The real goal now is the race to AGI, the race to the smartest AI, and they are committed on it 100%.
So basically, the net zero goals are all they were, a temporary scheme slash scam to make money off their carbon credits and whatnot. And now that there's a new thing, the new hot girl in town, so to speak, which is AI, very politically incorrect, but but nevertheless, this is how it looks like. They jumped from one thing to another very seamlessly, and yet there still seems to be this background commitment to these goals that were probably not all that realistic to begin with, and now they're completely
Yeah.
not, not even it's hard to even pretend that this is something that could even theoretically happen. So what's going on with that? Do they think that people are really that stupid, or is it just blatant corporate interest? What's
This is the sad, sad irony about Taiwan's relationship vis-a-vis the wider world. Because we know we are a small island and that we are highly dependent for our prosperity from trade with the outside, we pay disproportionate attention to what people are saying
Mhm.
outside of Taiwan. So back when people, let's say in 2016, they were like kind of doubtful, like, gee, is it really possible to replace nuclear energy with wind turbines and solar panels? Is it really possible? The message they got was, yes, it's possible. Look at Denmark. Look at Germany. They're going against nuclear energy. This is a trend of the future. You're going to build turbines, and they're going to end up being cheaper. You're going to end up saving money. Total lie, but it doesn't matter. The whole vibe that the whole world is going against nuclear energy kind of lulled the Taiwanese public into thinking, well, I guess it's possible if
Wait a
the
second.
European
There's one factor that everyone's forgetting about, which is the part of the reason Germany shut down its nuclear reactors were not only due to the overwhelming concerns of Fukushima, but also because of the Russian interests that were heavily influential with the party at the time.
Well, unfortunately, none of that ever got to Taiwan. That
Mhm,
kind of granularity, which
mhm,
even a lot of anti-nuclear um, proponents in Germany itself would deny, that level of detail never made it to Taiwan. They just saw all these amazing goals. Germany's going to phase out of nuclear power. Denmark's never got a nuclear power plant, and now they developed this amazing wind power.
mhm,
So it's like their shiny brochure, by the time it got to Taiwan, somehow
mm, mhm.
became, oh, that's what they're doing. That's what it is. It's very hard for people in Taiwan to look past that shiny brochure layer. So they were like, okay, really, I guess it's possible. And by the time, and we are still paying attention, by the time that Europe changed its mind on nuclear and things are turning around, do you think that the Taiwanese are unaware? Actually, we are aware.
Mhm.
Poll after poll shows that the people in Taiwan are actually quite pro-nuclear in terms of thinking that we should use it. Not everybody is like, yay, nuclear is so awesome. But here's a statistic that's absolutely stunning, which is that even 50% of DPP supporters, DPP being the anti nuclear party, the party that tied nuclear energy with being pro democracy so tightly together in the first place, even half of DPP supporters think we should at least keep using the nuclear power plants we have. So obviously you're like, okay, Taiwan obviously needs this energy, especially as, since I've explained, AI needs more power and
And people
President,
support it. So what's the
yeah,
problem?
people support it. What is the problem? The problem is the hardcore, the DPP, the older statesmen, the heart of the party, the people with
Mhm.
the power, they are either true anti-nuclear believers, which I think is possible because they grew up with it. That's what they know all their lives. Nuclear
Mhm.
power is evil. That's all they know. Either they're true hardcore believers or they feel like they've invested so much political capital over the years on this
The
topic.
sunken cost policy.
The thing is,
Policy.
it's very, very tricky. Actually, I've been talking sort of through back channels with the DPP.
Mhm.
Um, like I don't know who I'm even talking to. Just somebody reached out to me and say, "Hey, how do you suppose we turn around on this if we wanted to do that?" I'm like, well,
Mhm.
sounds like you guys internally know there's a problem. And he's like, yeah, we know it's a problem, but we need a way to like turn the ship.
Save
And
face basically, and
yeah, and I'm just like, you're asking me to solve not a technical problem, but a political problem for you,
mhm,
a political problem that you created and benefited for decades, and now it doesn't work out for you anymore. Being anti-nuclear is no longer a cudgel you can use to beat the opposition. It is, in fact, a vulnerability for you. And the next time you have a blackout, it's going to become a bigger vulnerability.
mhm.
My advice to you, I'm not even talking about the technical level, just on a political level, do it fast, get it done, just turn around, just do it. Just
Mhm.
like
Rip
it's
off the
gonna be
band-aid.
exactly. That's what I told them. And they're just like, no, we can't do that. That's going to hand the opposition party a huge win.
But
And
why, if they
it
now
is
hold
true
the same
because
position?
the problem is the opposition party has been harping on the fact that Taiwan needs nuclear for decades. And they've been insistent on this issue. They've been banging on the drum of this issue.
Mhm.
So, of course, it's hard for the DPP to turn around on this issue without saying to the voters, oh, they were right and we were wrong. All along, we've either lied to you or we were stupid. And I think that's something politically they don't feel like they can do.
Mm.
And here's the thing that's really, really sad because President Lai himself, he's been a president for a year now. He's not personally anti nuclear at all. And we can know this because even though it is like considered a huge taboo within the DPP to be pro nuclear, over the years, he said things that are obviously at least sympathetic to nuclear. He said things like, well, when you look at things in terms of air pollution, nuclear is actually the cleanest form of energy there is. Um, he was punished for that, by the way. He lost his job very, very soon, like 2 weeks after saying that. And then he, along the line, he said, well, in the case of Taiwan undergoing a real emergency, we should think about restarting those plants. This was in the run up to the presidential election. So he said all these things that had cause to give me hope, me personally, as somebody who's advocated for nuclear power in Taiwan for years. I was like, okay, President Tsai can't do it because her brand was too tied
Mhm.
closely to the anti nuclear policy. But President Lai, when he came into power, he had the golden opportunity to say, that was then, this is now. And while I appreciate President Tsai and all her efforts with renewable energy, we can see that we need a stable and uh, reliable and affordable source of energy. And therefore, we should extend the life of our nuclear power plants for another 20 years. He doesn't even have to say we need them forever. We should extend it for another 20 years until we figure out what to do. And it would have been extremely defensible, not just in terms of politics, but in terms of changing circumstances. For
True.
instance, China is threatening to blockade Taiwan. We know
Mhm.
from the exercises that the idea of shutting Taiwan down, maybe not even call it a blockade, call it a quarantine, call it custom inspections. They can call it whatever they want. It's very, very easy for them to keep the LNG shipments out. In fact, do you remember when Nancy Pelosi came to Taiwan?
True, of
Um,
course.
they did drills right after that that had basically 6 areas where missiles could just fall out of the sky. You don't know.
Mhm.
And during that time, LNG vessels were spooked. They didn't come into Taiwan. It was a very short period of exercises, so it didn't end up affecting our energy supply. But um, LNG vessel owners are not going to risk having one of their assets struck. Um, so they stayed away from deliveries to Taiwan. So LNG It's such an easy thing to blockade. You don't even need to blockade it. You just need to say, we can't guarantee your vessel won't be hit by our military exercises.
Hmm.
That's it.
So that
Um,
creates the Red Sea scenario.
hmm?
It creates
Sorry?
a Red Sea scenario. Like
Exactly.
what happened
Absolutely,
in the Red Sea,
absolutely.
which by the way is something that I predicted a couple years ago and nobody really listened, that China would be doubling down and coordinating this strategy, and this is exactly what's starting to
So
happen.
it would, of course, you can say a blockade is an act of war, but this is 2025. Do we really believe that the US government is going to come to Taiwan's rescue with the aircraft carriers because of possible military exercises? And what are they going to do? Escort the LNG vessels through the Straits of Taiwan? Um, I just don't see it happening. It's creating
Hmm.
a vulnerability. The Americans, by the way, are very well aware. And you have people like Larry Diamond of the Hoover Institution coming to Taiwan and pleading to the DPP government, please don't do this. Please keep the nuclear power plants on. And they've been ignored because this is why I don't like it when they say things like, oh, the Taiwanese government is a US proxy or whatever. No, they use the US government just as the US government try to use them. And the
Hmm.
way they use the US government is by saying, oh, we have backup. The US is our friend. Don't worry about it. DPP are so friendly with the US.
But the
But
Ukraine situation should have disavowed anyone of that notion at this point.
well, apparently there are people in Taiwan, and this is going to make you laugh when I say this, but I've literally heard people say, yeah, but Ukraine is not a core interest of the United States like Taiwan is. And this becomes very crazy making to me because I am Taiwanese American. I read what the think tanks and even military are writing about Taiwan. Their plan is not like coming in guns blazing, aircraft carriers, whatever, like it was during the 90s Straits crisis. Their plan, there's two, I get them confused all the time because one's called Hellscape, one's called Burning Moat, and they're basically different versions of we'll train you and we'll send you some drones.
Hmm.
Good luck. And that's doctrine. That is, you can't get more official than that. But somehow there's still this background assumption in Taiwan that America is so powerful that if China dare do anything towards Taiwan, then they're gonna get it. America's gonna show them what's what. And it's understandable because even if you're somebody who's like in their 40s and their 50s all your life, you during your formative years, America was number one, and it was so dominant vis-a-vis China that yeah, it's okay to feel protected. We were protected. We were rewarded for
The
being
issue
so.
is not that US doesn't have the resources to do it, although that I'll come to that point later. But the issue is that there is no political will to do that. It's not that US can't; it's that it won't. And the fact that there is official rhetoric to that, uh, the fact that there is a lot of people who don't think it's our job to fight in foreign conflicts or to be involved in any direct way. The fact that there is still, I mean, just look at the trajectory of the tariff war. It was not, it was not really a tariff war. It was something else, whatever you want to call it. It wasn't aimed at isolating China.
Well, I'm not a military expert, so I'm not going to speculate on to what degree US can't or won't. Um, I'm just going to comment on the fact that the last time we had a true crisis in the Taiwan Straits, that was during the 90s. And what Clinton did was just send two aircraft carriers coming through the Taiwan Straits. Crisis over. China couldn't even couldn't even try anything after that. It was so clear the disparity between force between America and China was that wide. Now we know that gap has closed somewhat. So maybe the US can still overpower China, but now the amount of political will required is so much higher because it's not just like a fly you can swat away with your hand anymore. Now, if the US wants to fight, it becomes a huge commitment with a massive set of unknowns. So I think that changes the equation completely, especially with Trump in the White House. He's on the record as saying, well, no, I shouldn't say that. That's wrong. He's not on the record, but John Bolton in his book recounted an incident where he was in the White House and Trump kind of held up the lid of a Sharpie and put it on the Resolute desk saying, that Sharpie tip is Taiwan, and that Resolute desk is like China. We're over here. We can't do anything about it. I think
Sounds like
that,
Trump.
yeah, sounds like Trump. I
But
don't think he confirmed it, nor has it been denied, but I think that's what he thinks.
But even leaving Trump himself aside, let's look at the trajectory of US policy. Every administration had an opportunity to retire the one China symbolic policy and to just say, this is not it. We recognize Taiwan's independence absolutely, and we will treat any act of invasion as if it's an attack on an entirely independent sovereign country, and that's it. That's all that needed to be said. Political message is
Well,
sometimes stronger than a military message because this gives a wiggle room to not have to do anything because ultimately if you keep this quote unquote strategic ambiguity, it gives you an out not to get involved. And as far as I see, not one administration even prior to Trump was serious about guaranteeing Taiwan security because if they were, they would have at the very least, and that's a floor, not a ceiling, recognized the uh, retired that policy and just said that this is not where we are anymore.
so I think Biden came pretty close to that. He came a lot. He came a lot closer. His aides keep walking it back because he'll
Mm-hmm.
say, "Of course we'll come to the." Biden keeps saying, "Of course we'll come to the defense of Taiwan," and his aides keep walking it back. But I think the Biden administration was actually when Taiwan came the closest to having strategic clarity over whether or not the US was going to come to our defense. But it's unfortunate that Biden was succeeded by Trump. And the contrast actually makes me, as a Taiwanese, feel more insecure than ever because it's a stark reminder that an American president can say that they are fairly committed to coming to Taiwan's aid in a contingency, and his successor can just, new game. It's like geopolitical Calvin ball. So, what I really wish could have happened was that the United States could have backed Taiwan more full heartedly back in a time when both Taiwan and the United States had a bigger relative advantage. And I know this is ancient history by now, but in the middle of the 80s, Taiwan had a nuclear weapons program. And we came very close to having our own bomb. And if that program had been allowed to continue, we know the US turned a blind eye to other allies, right? Israel has bombs.
Yeah. Well, India,
It,
they didn't know. They didn't. India just did it without asking
and
for
India just
permission.
did it, but let's not even talk about India. That's their own thing. But Taiwan, I wish, had been allowed to develop its nuclear weapons program. The geopolitical calculus would be completely different now if we had done that. And even, okay, if you're like, no, proliferation bad, okay, even if the US back when it was in its zenith of power, instead of running off to stupid wars elsewhere, if they just focused on Taiwan and say, we're going to disambiguate this, we're going to set the Pacific up for the future, we're going to future proof the Taiwan Straits, and they supported us, and we kind of created normalcy around Taiwan's status during a time when there was a geopolitical muscle to back it up. Yeah, I think that would have worked much better than whatever it is we're doing now. Now we're stuck in a situation where the United States is battling China for number one, and Taiwan, as a Taiwanese, I no longer really feel protected by the America. Instead, I feel a little worried that we're going to end up as do you ever watch Star Trek, Irina? You
I
know,
saw a couple of movies, not the whole
okay,
series.
but you know how often how in a Star Trek episode, they go down, beam down to the planet,
Hmm.
and somebody who's like not a regular rotating crew member gets shot, and that's
Hmm.
how the whole story gets started.
Hmm.
That guy is usually called a red shirt because they're usually wearing a red shirt. So I'm actually kind of afraid whether or not Taiwan will end up
Hmm.
being the geopolitical red shirt that get the whole US-China conflict actually started. Um, it's for that reason that I've been advocating for as much calmness, as much turning down of the temperature of tension over the Taiwan Straits as possible. I wish that we could attract less attention. I miss the time when Taiwan didn't appear so often on The Economist, or Foreign Affairs or whatever. I wish we could be like it was in the time of President Ma again. Taiwan was kind of a sleepy backwater that people didn't really pay much attention to. And somehow we can get back there. Taiwan just might be all right, but the situation rather seems to be the opposite. There's more focus, there's more anxiety, there's more tension.
I'm wondering at this point, given that Japan for a while had the same very hardline anti-nuclear position after the 2011, but now has kind of come back around due to the obvious necessity and being largely in very similar position and for somewhat different but also somewhat similar reasons. Is it not a natural point of for DPP an opportunity to use Japan's example to turn things around because they had the same problem. They had a much more recent disaster as an example, and they had the better reasons for opposing it, but they started turning it around, so they could just use Japan's example as an out. And second, can there be a more local alliance that is less dependent on the US and more dependent on building up the local anti-China or anti-invasion coalition by local countries, Japan, South Korea, India, a few others who are Philippines maybe in between, or others who may be in between but are likewise concerned. I mean, doesn't it, if there is an absence of US leadership, shouldn't it be a prompt for the countries to become a little bit more brazen about protecting their own interests?
Let me take those questions one at a time. First of all, of course, it's a wonderful example that Japan has set that energy pragmatism must come first before energy ideology. And as a pro nuclear activist, I've been trumpeting the message that if Japan can't do it on renewable energy alone, neither can Taiwan. And that's a message that lands very well. Unfortunately, it is not a message that is enough. So many things have happened to Taiwan that should have shaken any sleepy person into waking up on this energy. Have we had blackouts? Since I started covering energy in Taiwan in 2020, Taiwan have suffered 3 island-wide rolling blackouts lasting hours. Um, have we had an unforeseen geopolitical contingency? Yes, we talked about the blockade scenario. Have the world all around us changed its mind on nuclear energy? Yes, Europe and Japan, two regions that we take very seriously as bellwethers of global opinion, have changed their mind on nuclear energy. Even, by the way, Jensen Huang, the founder and CEO of NVIDIA, and uh, someone we consider one of our own because he's a Taiwanese American, he has come out to speak up for nuclear energy, of course, because NVIDIA is an AI company and
Mm-hmm.
he wants to build data centers in Taiwan so that he can, it's self-interest, but it's also like makes perfect sense given his business. And he's a superstar here. You think his word counts for something. But all those things have happened, and it's been not enough to change the centrality of the problem, which is that DPP is so married to being anti-nuclear. Situation is different in Japan. The what is it, the LDP there, right? They they practically have one party rule. I think there's been changes of power, but they've been blips. Otherwise, it's basically one party in
Mm-hmm.
power all the time. It's easier in under those decisions to take on unpopular decisions.
Mm-hmm.
It's easier to steer the ship around. The DPP is vulnerable, so they hate to take a political loss. That's the your first
Mm.
question taken care of. Um, Second question. In the absence of the United States being a present and reliable partner, is it possible for regional partners to get together and form a regional defense bloc united against China? That's more or less your question, right?
Yes, but more serious than Quad, which is US-led and which has had its own share of problems for
Is it
precisely
possible?
because of US role in it, actually.
I see, I see. Is it possible to have a non-US regional defense bloc to help um, basically like stronger together? We're all weak against China. Can we form together into a stronger alliance?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, but I will tell you what I've been seeing in the behavior of individual countries since the US have become more isolationist and less of a good geopolitical actor. I've seen individual countries not just like lose the US, but they're leaning towards China. So you see Japan, you see all these regional countries that were previously more on the team US, when they lose their protector, they
Mm-hmm.
automatically think we have to balance our
Mm.
geopolitical portfolio. We cannot put all our eggs in the US basket. So they've started panda hugging. Starting to see Japan panda hug. South Korea is gonna panda hug like crazy. And in this environment where every individual country, out of its own realpolitik interest, is gonna want to start looking good to Beijing, the last thing they want to do is extend a helping hand to Taiwan. And Taiwan is the one country in the
Mm-hmm.
region. Well, we're not even a country according to the United Nations. We're the one geopolitical entity in the region that do not have the option of doing that. We can only keep hoping and praying and begging the United States to not abandon us. It is a horrible and humiliating situation to be in. You've seen with the Trump tariffs how basically the US is trying to bully the world into giving them like very, very undue advantages. They're asking for very unreasonable things. And for the most part, most countries have tried to placate the US without giving in. But Taiwan I don't even know if we really negotiated yet, but we put all our cards on the table. We're like, here, how much do you want us to spend on military equipment, US military equipment? We'll spend it. Do you want us to buy more LNG from America? We'll buy it. We'll even sign an MOU saying we'll help you develop Alaskan LNG, which is going to be the most expensive LNG in the world. We don't care. Oh, what this I hear? You want TSMC? Here, take another piece of TSMC. You want the most advanced nodes? We'll promise it to you. So Taiwan is in the terrible and embarrassing geopolitical position of only getting to rely on America, the unreliable. And not only do all these other countries that you wonder if they can form a regional bloc to defend Taiwan, they might or might not form a regional bloc to defend themselves, but they won't do it for Taiwan. They don't recognize Taiwan as a country. None of them sell Taiwan weapons. So we're in the middle of building these indigenous made in Taiwan submarines now. They're going to cost many times the cost of just buying them off the shelf from, say, South Korea. We can't do it. South Korea won't sell them to us. So we can do a bit of technology transfer from South Korea, a bit of technology transfer from different countries, and try and cobble together our own submarines. I don't think they'll be ready in time for whatever's happening, but we don't have a choice. So I guess what I'm saying to you, Irina, is I can only tell you what I see on the ground. Taiwan is not in a good situation, no matter how you cut it. And the thing that will help us the most is for US to somehow return to its former place as the linchpin of the international system that actually excludes Taiwan, but at least we're even as the international, I think of the international order as a house that Taiwan's not included in. We can't go inside and warm ourselves by the fire, but we keep ourselves dry by tucking ourselves under its rooftops outside of the house. And even that protection is in threat of being withdrawn right now.
Well, if Washington believes that sacrificing or just ignoring Taiwan is going to somehow lead to better business, I think it's a complete delusion. I think it's very obvious what will happen once China takes one piece. There's absolutely nothing stopping it from going after everybody else. Everybody else, starting with Philippines and Vietnam, will get picked off one by one, either militarily or politically. And the whole region will collapse and become a Chinese, not just sphere of influence, but a colony. It's already to some extent sphere of influence is what's happening now. Colonization is what will happen next once China sees no block to.
I'm gonna push back a little bit against that. My belief is that China considers Taiwan a part of its sovereign territory, and it is absolutely committed to, at some point, reclaiming it. For everybody else, I believe they will just get Finlandized to hell. There will be border disputes, but I don't believe China wants to militarily conquer the Philippines or Japan or Korea or anything like
Need
that.
to necessarily, but it will use the element of military force as political leverage, without a doubt.
That is, it goes without saying that whether or not they take Taiwan, with China being the political, military, economic top dog in the region, as the United States recedes into its, I don't know, new Turtle Island sphere of influence, then by default, everybody else falls into the Chinese sphere of influence. And I think that there's on some level for people who have grown up in a world order where United States is top dog, that seems utterly unacceptable. I think we might have to start doing some attitude readjustment of how bad is it that we're willing to risk World War III not to have that happen? Because what I see is the United States, as it tries really hard to hold on to its dominant status, is actually making a series of mistakes that is hastening its downfall.
I
That I
agree
feel
completely.
forced errors, extremely unforced errors, I'd rather. So they've started taking an extractive relationship towards its former allies that spooks and alienates them. And it also basically whittles down its own strength, since we know the United States is physically distanced from the world. So for force projection, it's, apart from its own expeditionary army, it's utterly reliant on its allies, utterly reliant, and it's breaking the relationship with them. So yeah, I'm gonna cop to stealing this from a Chinese commentator, but he basically saying America is doing a Tonya Harding, meaning it's trying to
Kneecapping.
it's trying to kneecap China. And I don't even think that's wrong, right? But if you want to kneecap an opponent successfully, you can't do it when they're almost as big as you.
And when they control the natural resources and you don't have any graceful way of getting to the same level of resources that they can
So
deny you very easily.
the mistake that America made goes all the way back. At least this is the last possible, like letting China into the WTO and falling into the delusion that it's going to be like Pygmalion, that it's going to be like My Fair Lady. We're going to make China this beautiful, shining, democratic thing that's going to be, you know, one big, happy chimerica family. Eventually, they're going to see the light, become democratic, become open. That was a delusion. And because America bought into that delusion, really until, I mean, we've been bashing on him, but I think Donald Trump was the American president that woke up to the fact that it's really not going to work. Obama tried to do a little bit of pivot to the Pacific, but nothing major. By the time that happened, you can argue it was already too late. Now it really is too late. So what do we do from now is beyond my pay grade. But the first thing America can do is to stop hurting itself. And the first thing that Taiwan can do is turn on its nuclear power plants. But people are not doing these very obvious things that I see can at least help them preserve their position for a little bit longer while they look for other solutions, because there are no
Yeah.
good solutions.
Out of curiosity, has the US government expressed any positions about the nuclear plant?
I believe they have. About 2 weeks ago, depends on what you mean by official solution. There's been no like President Trump direct social media post telling Taiwan to turn nuclear plants back on. But I believe, was it about a month ago? They held a hearing on Capitol Hill specifically on the subject of energy security in Taiwan and the threat from China, the blockade threat. And there were some very in-depth, very good discussions, both from Congress people and their expert testimonies, that really exposes how vulnerable Taiwan is and how the Taiwan as an ally is making the United States' job of trying to defend it much harder by not taking care of the very basic, which is energy security. So there was a lot of discussion, and the general consensus from those hearings, I can't remember specific quotes, is that Taiwan needs to take care of itself so that it's not dead weight on the United States, right? Even if the United States wants to help, Taiwan needs to be in a position that makes us helpable. And if you're going to get blacked out, if you're going to not take care of these basic fundamentals, you are not a helpable partner. So that was a general tenor of that hearing. So I believe that the United States, and they have done so through back channels. I happen to have gone to DC last December, and I talked to staffers, Republican staffers, by the way. This was before Trump came into power, but very obvious he was going to come into power.
Mm-hmm.
And I talked to them about it, and they were all like, yeah, we don't want to be meddling Taiwan's domestic business. It just seems like a really bad idea. What's going on? We talk to them all the time. They don't listen to us. They don't listen to you because they care not about your opinions. They care about winning elections.
But the elections are, how would they lose? How would they win elections if they are seen as easy bait for China? Isn't that that was the whole pitch to begin with?
Yeah, well, that's what the KMT is trying to say. And the DPP solution is to say, if you doubt America's commitment, if you doubt Taiwan's ability to defend itself, you're being unpatriotic.
Oh,
You are
gosh.
being defeatist.
Well,
You're
here's the
being
question:
under monkey.
why would anyone want to be dependent on another country to begin with, even if the US were completely 100% reliable?
I think
Wouldn't that?
I think it's because of some very unpleasant raw facts, which is, I believe that China's population versus Taiwan is a 60-1 ratio. In terms of military spending, they outspend us 16-1. Some people say it's 11-1. I don't know. It's hard to tell. We know they have their own very complete military industrial complex. I know that the cost for them to get a equivalent piece of kit by producing it themselves, it's a lot cheaper than us getting it from America. We can only buy arms from America because of our unique diplomatic situation. We cannot buy it from anybody else. By the way, we don't get a friends and family discount from America. We actually have to buy it at a premium price. And a lot of it is not top shelf kit. It's an unfortunate truth that what makes it to Taiwan from America tends to be stuff they're trying to get rid of. This demoralizes our military. It makes the cynical amongst us think that America's always thought of Taiwan not as a partner, but as a pawn. We are a prawn stuck between two whales, but a pawn. And there's a lot of people coming to the conclusion that we're being set up to be the Ukraine of Asia.
It's exactly what I was trying to say earlier.
We don't want to be the Ukraine of Asia because we've seen that movie. It sucked. We don't want to be in
It really does.
We don't want to be in the Pacific reboot. Ukraine 2, Pacific Boogaloo. No, thanks. We don't want to see that movie. And I think for America, that's something to watch out for, because I think there's a lot of people in the foreign policy or armed services establishment in America who's working off the assumption that if anything break out over the Taiwan Straits, that brave little Taiwan is going to fight like the Ukrainians and give the Chinese a real bloody nose. My message to them is, don't count on it. Look at Ukraine before the invasion. They had their Azov battalion. They had big, scary guys. In Taiwan, people are not martial in the same way. People are not up for the resistance in the same way. They might say things like, yes, I'm willing to fight and die for my country. That might even be true, but they're not trained up and hardened in the same way that allow them to be actually effective. So I think the best thing for everybody involved including China, but especially for Taiwan and especially for the United States, is to make sure that no war breaks out over the Taiwan Straits. Some mix of diplomacy and deterrence won't be needed to thread that needle. But if there is war over the Taiwan Straits, I don't see a scenario where either Taiwan or the US end up coming up ahead.
Meanwhile, is there a solution for energy security issue to prevent the events from accelerating any further? Are there any other partners or energy partners who can provide some sort of a mix of energy solutions until either the official policy changes or something else happens?
I'm going to answer the question I wish you asked, which is, Angelica, what would you do about the energy policy of Taiwan if you had complete control?
Hmm.
I'm just like, actually, if we can get sensible ideas going, our position is not too bad. The
Hmm.
thing is, we have 6 reactors that
Mhm.
are mothballed. They haven't been fully taken apart. They're still there. They're very well preserved. If we can take our 6 reactors, turn them back on, and then take Longmen, right? Don't forget about Longmen. It's
Sure.
never produced any electricity, but it's one reactor is very close to completion, and the other reactor is more than halfway there, say. In short order, if we really put our minds to it, we can get all our reactors restarted and our 2 new reactors finished and start producing electricity. That would at least, so in very short order, maybe 3 to 5 years. Longmen Unit 2 might take a little longer, but let's say 3 years, we can get at least the first 6 restarted, and then Longmen 1 maybe. That's already like maybe 20% of our grid. So all of a sudden you have a bit of a floor to work with. And then I would say keep every single coal power plant going for as long as possible. You don't have to run them all the time, but keep them in good operational nick. Because yeah, sure, carbon is bad and climate change, blah, blah, blah. That's not the problem that Taiwan should be worrying about right now. Until Taiwan's geopolitical problems are sorted, we should make it like not a priority at all to talk about carbon.
Yeah,
Because
I don't think the planet is going to die of carbon in in
well,
in the next
I
few
don't
years.
know. I don't know. Let's say I trust the science. Even if I trust the science 100%, climate change is so horrible. But you got to give Taiwan an exemption because for Taiwan, in our position, energy security is so key. So you
Given
gotta,
Taiwan's size, I don't see how it would be a huge deal maker in the total
yes, we're such a
planetary.
small island, right? We're such a small island. So Taiwan needs to get its energy house in order by privileging the reliable sources of energy that is nuclear, that is coal. Solar and batteries, they can play a role. We need more, but we need to make sure we have enough, like maybe some sort of decentralized solution. Diesel backup generators, how many are there? Where are there? What if our central electricity bus gets taken out? These are the things that we need to think of. And I actually don't think we should do any more LNG. I think 50% LNG is awfully high. It should be lower because that is going to be the
A
most blockade
vulnerability.
form. Yeah. So it's right now, Taiwan in the summer, we can only hold 8 days of LNG at hand at any one time. We have to be constantly resupplied, daily resupplied.
I see.
So
I see actually a natural pivot in response to the question by the DPP person to you about how to pivot on this issue. and he didn't seem to be open to the possibility of just doing a direct pivot. But what about a gradual pivot, starting with the introduction of smaller modular reactors, as other countries are
Here,
doing?
Irina, I am so sorry to have to tell you this, but small modular reactors, SMRs, I actually call them smartly marketed reactors.
They're not
Far,
useful.
well, have you ever had a milkshake?
Yeah, of course.
You go to McDonald's and you can get a medium milkshake, or
Mm-hmm.
you can get an extra large milkshake, right?
Mm-hmm.
And of course, I'd probably finish the medium milkshake. I wouldn't even get halfway through the extra large. It's a lot more milkshake.
Mm-hmm.
But if you turn the cups this way and you compare how big they are, you realize that the extra large cup is only a little bit wider than the medium milkshake. What does this have to do with nuclear reactors? It means that traditionally, to get nuclear reactors to be more efficient, to be cheaper, you build it a little larger. The larger it is, the much more heat it can produce.
Mm-hmm.
So the idea of doing small modular reactors so that they're fast and cheap doesn't work at all unless you're going to a completely different technology tree. Can we go to a completely different technology tree? Maybe, but it's not going to be 2040s. It's not going to be 2030s. It's not going to be 2040s. Maybe China can do it in 2040s. What are we going to do? Import a small modular reactor from China? All the SMR startups in the West, a lot of them are just, I call them paper reactors,
Mm-hmm.
PowerPoint reactors. Probably the most likely reactor is, again, SMR doesn't mean anything. It's just like small reactors, right? So there is a company I like called Kairos Power. Um, and they do something called triso fuel, which is okay, maybe they will get online in 2026. They have a construction license, but it's niche, it's small, it's very, 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 very expensive. So can we explore it? Certainly. I would love to help bring those reactors to Taiwan. And by the way, the DPP is less resistance
Mm-hmm.
to that kind of reactor because they've never been against it in the past, right? It's new. Doesn't have the political baggage. The
I
problem
see
is
it not as a solution. I see it, frankly, as a transition and a face-saving
it's so
measure.
expensive. It's so expensive. And
Uh,
so I think what the ideal political scenario is for President Lai to say, we can't quite do without our big reactor there. Let's give a 20-year extension to our big reactors. Meanwhile, let's import some of these small reactors from Kairos, and they'll be so expensive. But symbolically, I think it'll be good because it'll show that nuclear has a future. But to tell the truth, especially with the AI low growth. By the way, President Lai actually wants to make AI like his thing. He's always using the Taiwan AI island slogan when we can't even cite a decent sized data center anywhere on the island. It's pathetic. But yeah, I think the best we can expect is to have a moratorium on caring about carbon, reopening our nuclear power plants, importing some new small nuclear power plants, and learning to love coal again. I'm not saying we have to build another coal reactor. Just make sure the ones we have are really well maintained, and if anything goes wrong, like refurbish it so that we can run it again. Um, and then, we can have a little bit of wind and solar on top, like a parsley, like a sprig of green decoration.
I think the only way to get to the point where the government will, before changing hands to another party, will adopt this program is if there is push for it. Right now, it sounds like there's a support for nuclear energy, but it doesn't sound like there's an active demand for the government to change its policy.
I think it's hard because people think of energy as a niche issue,
Uh,
and they
mhm.
know that it's important, but hey, lights are coming on every day when they, go to
But when
the
they have, but what about the times when they didn't, when they were blackouts? Wouldn't
yeah, there
that
were
be reason?
blackouts. There were three blackouts, but they were just like, well, we were blacked out for a few hours. I guess that's not ideal.
Mm,
Um, People don't realize that when having a functional, stable energy system, it's a privilege. You don't know how rare it is. You take it for granted, and the way you lose your power system is it fragilizes, and then it's like going bankrupt. Everything's okay until it's not, and we're not there. We're getting there, and but people don't see when you're not there that it could be a real danger, that Taiwan might Philippinize in terms of both its
mm,
grid and its economy. Um, we might become like the Philippines, which is like I would define that as a country that's punching below its weight substantially because of systemic and governance problems. We
mhm,
might be richer than the Philippines because we're entering into a phase of bad governance, when we already have a higher technology and GDP base. But that sense of fragmentation and bad governance and putting politics ahead of policy, um, is just very, very present in my mind. So, what can we do? I think I said everything that I can say in
mhm,
Taiwan. One thing I would really love to see and could make all the difference is if there are voices within the DPP brave enough to break out, and because the more the KMT clamor for nuclear, the more they're pushing the DPP into a corner where they cannot
mm,
change their mind on nuclear. So more like I myself happen to be aligned with TPP, which is a smaller party that's like
mhm,
used to be more DPP aligned. Now it's more KMT aligned. It's complicated. I won't go into it.
mhm,
But for me, a TPP person, to keep going on about how we need nuclear and how bad it is that we don't have it, or a KMT person to be like, DPPB is being irresponsible. DPP has to let us use nuclear power.
mm.
In a way, it's counterproductive. I mean, I
Sure.
see myself doing it. It's counterproductive because it's getting the DPP to turtle up. It's making it more political untenable for them to change the narrative. So you need people from within the DPP to say,
Mhm,
oh my God, we were so silly. Nuclear power is good, actually. Okay. And it'll actually be a huge political coup because they're taking one of the biggest cudgels that the KMT has to beat them over the head with, which is energy security. And they say, okay, we're the ruling party. We'll take that. Now it's ours. You're being a hypocrite. What about the past? We don't care. We're just going to do it. I think, well, if there's
need to be
anything, hmm?
someone from a younger generation and not affiliated
Maybe,
with the
I don't
current
know.
government.
If they can just do that, that's just like, I think there's one thing we can all learn from Donald Trump. Sometimes you just need to be strategically shameless. If something's not working, just turn around and do something else. Don't apologize. Declare victory and then do exactly what it is needs to be done.
Hmm,
Don't allow yourself to be shackled to a bad policy because of
sure.
political sunk cost fallacy.
Mhm. I really hope there are some people, and you know what? For some of them, it could be a matter of self-interest. If there is a future election win for them internally inside the party, why not sell it to them in that way?
I hope so because my public persona is like I'm always like tearing my hair out over the DPP, and it's true. I really there's something about them that really gets to me. It's not just the energy issue. They're also they weaponize wokeness to get their political agenda done, and that's something I'm very allergic to. So I can't do it, but I do, as just as a technology, just as an energy expert, I do talk to the DPP, and I advise them all the time. You guys need to rise up from within yourself, because we can't wait for election. It's 3 years to another election. And the KMT have also made themselves kind of unelectable on a national level anyhow, because they become a bit too friendly to China. And
Mhm.
most Taiwanese see that as a risk. If you vote KMT, you're voting for a bloodless Chinese takeover.
Sure.
I'm not saying that that's true. A lot of KMT people will say that's slander. I'm just saying that's what the people think.
Mhm.
So, what do you do if you have a DPP that's always going to be in power? Our energy policy is going to remain retarded unless there's people inside the DPP who's willing to stand up for sanity.
Mhm.
Unfortunately, I've been looking for that person. I've been looking, and I haven't found a single one that's willing from within the DPP to say, hey, we need energy sanity now. Not a single one. I hope that President Lai could do it, because he kind of did it in the past. No, as soon as he got the presidency, he's been very muted on the subject. So miracles can always happen. I'm not giving up hope. I'm advocating on this issue. I'm trying to do everything that I can. It is literally my job. I'm very fortunate in that I'm philanthropically supported. So, um, you know, for me, this mission is as long as it takes. I kind of split my time half and half between advocacy and then reporting on nuclear energy issues from around the world. I was just at the
Mhm.
IAEA, and I'm so happy to see that most places have returned to sanity for most countries. Now, the problem isn't ideological. The problem is the Western countries, including Europe, including the United States, they've forgotten how to build infrastructure, fairly basic infrastructure. France built 45 nuclear power reactor in a span of 15 to 20 years. This was back in the 70s. They didn't even ask the government for money. They went to New York. They sold commercial papers. They raised their own bonds. And then they paid it off. No drama. That was what France was able to do. And since then, they lost it. They forgot how. Their last reactor builds have been disasters. Like by the time Okilioto 3 or Flamanville started splitting atoms, they were like 18 years old enough to buy champagne. It's ridiculous. And the thing is, that's the basic problem with the West. In a way, of course, ooh, China is scary. China's, but learn how to get back to where you were
Mhm.
in terms of ability, in terms of unity, in terms of social cohesion, in terms of quality of leadership. Can you get back to where you were in the 60s and 70s? If you can't, you don't deserve to be world number one. You are living on borrowed time.
Mhm. And I think there are, and I think these wake up calls one after another are still not enough. The sort of
How
conversations
many
have been.
wake up calls do we need? I'm
It's.
just like,
I
oh,
think
this will
we're in the
surely
middle of a
be the wake up
disaster
call.
already.
That will surely be the wake up call.
We've got multiple flashpoints around the world. We've got, Chinese cyber attacks all over Europe. We've got, in Russian, spies mass produced at local factories. I think we're past. I think we're well past wake up calls. I think we're in phase one of some sprawling cold slash hot war.
Well, in that case, I think it's the job of geopolitical commentators like you to keep everybody well appraised of what's going on, and so we can all make it through this one, whatever this is.
I agree with that completely. And thank you so much for your time and for your insights. It was really paradigm shifting for me, primarily because a lot of these internal issues in Taiwan are just not covered in the US media. And so it's very hard to get a clear sense of what's going on there and why things are the way they are. There's just some bits and pieces, and the angle is always, China versus Taiwan and nothing else about the actual dynamics inside the country. So I think this is very, very helpful to help understand.
I think the first step is understanding. You have to understand the foreign media is very captured by the DPP point of view.
Mm-hmm.
Because first of all, the KMT, they're kind of weird. They're kind of bad at PR. They're used to being authoritarian. They had an authoritarian past, right? They're not good at the PR thing. And also there's a lot of misunderstanding within Taiwan about the United States. I think before we even think about what to do, let's understand each other first really well as allies before we can figure out what to do.
Sure, that makes sense.
Great. Well, thank you so much for having me on.
And thank you, and best of success in your very important work. I hope you manage to get through to somebody, or at least people close to somebody who can help with the process. I think it will require creating a coalition or an alliance of people pushing for this actively and providing incentives for people to start questioning their position within the party. Maybe connecting them to companies that want to work in Taiwan but needs the nuclear energy there. So if they see there's a political and financial opportunity for themselves, they may be willing to challenge the status quo.
Hey, if there's anybody listening to this show who think along these lines, please get in touch with me. You can follow Angelica Oung on LinkedIn. I'm very easy to find. And if there's anything you want to know about energy in Taiwan, I either have the answer or I'll know somebody who does.
Thank you so much, and thanks everyone who joined the show. We'll be back next week, Tuesday night at 9 p.m. EST, as usual. And this was the Washington Outsider Report on the Coalition Radio. Thanks for joining. Have a great evening.